was no place in America like Yankee Stadium. Few places lived as long, saw as many icons, or hosted more championships. Join me as we recap all 85 years of history, from the days of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig all the way to the World Series of Jeter and Rivera. This is the complete story of the Cathedral of Baseball, Yankee Stadium. My name is Lee Brees, and this is Modern Ruins, Episode 13. The year was 1900. Ban Johnson, who owned the Western League, a collection of minor league baseball clubs, decided to rename it to the American League. Johnson insisted that its clubs were major league teams on par with the already established National League, but they laughed in his face. Johnson still tried to promote his league without recognition and opted to place a team in heavily populated New York City. However, the National League already had the New York Giants and Brooklyn Dodgers, and they went on the offensive to prevent such a thing from occurring. And given that their respective stadiums were a few of the only places a baseball team could play in front of a crowd, they had significant influence on the move. After placing a team in Baltimore failed, Johnson and his clubs finally convinced the National League to coexistence in 1903, and at this point, again requested an American League team be allowed in New York City, this time with 15 of the 16 major league owners voting in favor, and the Giants had little else they could do to stop it from happening. The new baseball franchise was awarded to Frank Farrell and William Devery, a businessman and police chief respectively. However, it's disputed as to whether the two bought the original Baltimore franchise that had failed and relocated them, or were given an entirely brand new team. Either way, 1903 was when it all went down. The two constructed a 16,000-seat stadium in the Washington Heights neighborhood in Upper Manhattan. While the stadium was modest, the property it sat on was massive, amounting to 9.6 acres. The most beneficial aspect of this was that there was plenty of room for spectators to park their horse and buggies. Remember, this was 1903. When the new American League Park opened that same year, it was hardly half finished. The outfield lacked grass, the grandstand was incomplete, and a swamp sat directly next to the field and interfered with play. Players also had to dress in hotel rooms, as the clubhouse had only been partially constructed. Given the stadium's location and owner's Scottish-Irish heritage, the team was formally named the New York Highlanders, but really, people called the team whatever they wanted. Fans referred to them as the New York Americans, and newspapers called them the Invaders. New York Press sports editor Jim Price coined the moniker Yankees, abbreviating to Yanks for fitting the name into headlines. The team with various names consistently finished among the top of the American League in the days before the World Series. The Giants were forced to play at the Rough and Ready complex after their Polo grounds had burned down, and after it was rebuilt, the team decided to move in with the Giants at the new Polo grounds after their lease had expired at the now called Hilltop Park. When beginning play in 1913, all other monikers fell by the wayside, and New York Yankees became most widely used. But they lacked any kind of success, resulting in financial losses to Farrell and Devery, who sold the team in 1915. By 1920, tensions across the league had subsided and trading players became more common. The White Sox, Red Sox, and Yankees became particularly cozy with each other, especially as the Red Sox owner, Harry Frazee, began trading most of his top players for cash as he sought to raise funds for his theatrical productions, in turn tanking the team. This deliberate tanking would later turn into the curse of the Bambino, as post-Frazee's ownership, the team would play the next 86 seasons without a World Series victory. The player at the center of it all was 25-year-old George Herman Ruth Jr. He had garnered the nickname Babe Ruth after essentially becoming teacher's pet on one of his previous teams due to his extraordinary talent. The Yankees immediately shot to great success. Ruth hit home runs with relative ease and with high frequency. He and the team became so fun to watch that they quickly began to draw larger crowds than the deemed superior New York Giants, who became disgruntled about the Yankees' success. The 1921 and 1922 World Series were both played entirely at Polo grounds, as the two teams won their respective pennants and faced off for the championship title. with the Giants defeating the Yankees both times. World Series played among New York City teams were later referred to as Trolley Series, and even later, Subway Series, given that every venue used for those games was entirely accessible by the New York transportation system. After the 1921 season, the Giants issued an eviction notice to the increasingly popular Yankees. At the time, there was considerable doubt about the staying power of Major League Baseball, especially after World War I and the Black Sox scandal, in which 8 White Sox players gained up with sports gamblers to fix the World Series that year, which drastically sunk popularity for the sport. Building a new stadium in itself seemed like an ill-conceived move, and many suggested that the Yankees relocate out of New York entirely given the presence of 2 other teams already. But after drawing 1.3 million fans during the 1921 season and consistently bringing Polo grounds beyond standing capacity, the Yankees owners not only suggested building a new stadium, but proposed a venue more than twice the size of any at that time, with enough seating to house 60,000 spectators. The Yankees owners brokered a deal to buy the Hebrew Orphan Asylum located on Amsterdam Avenue between 136th and 138th Streets in Manhattan, but the two couldn't agree on the final terms. The next thought was building on top of the railroad tracks on the west side of Manhattan, but what the pair ultimately settled on was a 10-acre lumberyard in the Bronx, which sat on the east side of the Harlem River and mirrored Polo grounds on the Manhattan side. They then wrote a $600,000 check to the owner, equal to $10 million today, and the rest is history. Ground was broken for the largest baseball stadium in the world on May 5, 1922, and construction would continue for 11 months. Thomas Edison consulted on the project and invented special, harder concrete to use in the unprecedented complex. Osborne Engineering Corporation served as the architecture firm, while White Construction Co. acted as the general contractor. The opening ceremony for the monumental engineering achievement known as the house that Ruth built was Olympic in caliber. A parade featuring players, dignitaries of New York, and the 7th Regiment Band led by John Philip Sousa, among others, marched before an extraordinary crowd whose jubilation was unrivaled to any other event. The first game in the new Yankee Stadium was played on April 18, 1923, in a matchup with the Bambino's former team, the Boston Red Sox. John Philip Sousa and the 7th Regiment Band played the Star-Spangled Banner, and the new facility was dedicated, concluding with Babe Ruth being presented with a symbolically large bat, and New York Governor Al Smith throughout the first pitch to Yankees catcher Wally Shang. The stadium had a designed seating capacity of 58,000 seats, but over 100,000 turned out for the never-before-seen event. Over 74,000 were permitted entrance to the game, with 25,000 standing outside or watching from Coogan's Bluff across the river. The previous attendance record for an MLB game occurred during the 1916 World Series in Boston, when a whopping 42,000 turned out for the event. Babe Ruth hit 3 home runs and a 4-1 victory over the Red Sox, and when the press asked for his thoughts on the momentous occasion following the game, Ruth simply said, "Some ball yard," followed by, "I was glad to have hit the first home run in this park. God only knows who will hit the last." The venue was completed at a cost of $2.5 million and was the first in North America to have 3 tiers of seating, with the original 3rd tier sitting only above the corners of left and right field, and was extended later in the decade. The Yankees shot to great success in the stadium's inaugural year, consistently drawing 80,000 or more fans. They finally won vengeance over their in-town rival, New York Giants, in the 1923 World Series, winning 4-2 for their first championship when Yankee Stadium was less than 6 months old. The 1927 season saw one of the greatest Yankee teams of all time, known as Murderers Row. The club never fell out of first place, winning 110 games. Ruth set a single-season record of 60 home runs that would last for over 3 decades. First baseman Lou Gehrig beat his RBI record, however, on their way to a sweep in the World Series, and their success continued into the following year. 1932 would be the next notable championship and was played against the Chicago Cubs. The Yankees would win once again in a sweep, but the championship would be the final one for Babe Ruth in a Yankee uniform, as he left for the Boston Braves in 1935 and retiring altogether later that year. The season after, The first set of extensive renovations were made to the 13-year-old stadium. Wooden bleachers were replaced with concrete, and the rest of the upper decks of seating were extended. Formal bullpens were also added, and the stadium was now in its definitive shape it would hold for the next 35 years. The Yankees originally announced plans to build a fourth tier of seating after the end of World War II, which would raise capacity to 100,000 fans, but this never materialized. The team was led in the 1930s by Lou Gehrig, taking them to 4 straight World Series victories. He was forced to retire in 1939 due to an illness that would later bear his name, and passed away only 2 years later. His number 4 jersey became the first number retired in baseball, and on the day his jersey was retired, and facing his impending death, he gave an emotional speech thanking fans for making him, quote, "the luckiest man on the face of the earth." Joe DiMaggio then became the team's star, and his 56-game hitting streak still stands today. However, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, most players, including DiMaggio, were drafted into the Army for the U.S.'s entrance into World War II. Despite the slim lineup, the Yankees were still able to pull off another championship in 1943. After winning 4 more titles since returning from the war, DiMaggio retired in 1951, and the Yankee Clipper was replaced by rookie Mickey Mantle and co-stars pitcher Whitey Ford and catcher Yogi Berra. By this point, the Yankees had been sold, and the original stadium developers had since passed. The team's new owners, who also owned the Kansas City Blues Stadium, opted to sell both ballparks to real estate developer Arnold Johnson, who owned Yankee Stadium for a year before selling it to John Cox, who purchased the stadium only to donate it to his alma mater, Rice University, who became the official owners of the 40-year-old stadium in 1962. By the 1960s, the Yankees were the crown jewel of New York, still in the days before the NFL and NBA had become significant sports leagues. There was no team as successful or well-known as the New York Yankees. They won 5 World Series in a row during the 1950s, all against in-town rivals except in 1950 when they defeated the Philadelphia Phillies. The 1956 World Series would see Yankees pitcher Don Larson throw a perfect game at Yankee Stadium, which was the first no-hitter in an MLB game in more than 3 decades, and today remains the only perfect game in the World Series. They lost the pennant 2 years prior, however, and fans were so distraught about the loss that a novel was written about the season and was later adapted into a musical. The Yankees were so popular that the New York Giants, who had fought against the team's existence since inception and forced the team out of their stadium in the 1920s, were run out of town and relocated to San Francisco in 1957. Despite the incredible market size that was New York City, the Brooklyn Dodgers were also crushed by the Yankees' star power and relocated to Los Angeles in the same year, and the Yankees had the last laugh. After taking ownership of the ballpark in the early 1960s, Rice University gave it a cosmetic makeover, painting the concrete exterior white and interior blue, with the metal frieze on the upper deck being painted white. The pair of Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris would be the next Yankee stars to sweep the league, known as the M&M Boys. They broke many MLB records, with Maris passing Babe Ruth's single-season home run record. Their peak was in the 1962 World Series, which resulted in another championship. The Yankees had won their 10th World Series in 16 years, and thankfully for baseball fans across America, this would be the team's last for a while. Given the venue's capacity and scarcity, other sports attempted to call the venue home. Since being constructed, numerous football teams and various leagues played their games at Yankee Stadium. It wouldn't be until the NFL's New York Giants, who began playing games there in 1956, that the venue would have a second stable tenant, and in fact, it played host to the 1958 NFL Championship game. Various soccer teams also tried to establish themselves in the ballpark, but all were short-lived. The Yankees' kingdom that was New York City wouldn't last forever, and in 1962, the National League added the New York Mets, who played at the former baseball giants' old Polo grounds, while their new Shea Stadium was constructed in Queens. After the 1964 season, television company CBS purchased an 80% stake in the Yankees. The following year, the team finished with the worst record in 4 decades and had back-to-back losing seasons for the first time since 1918. While CBS's ownership is affiliated with some of the worst years for Yankees baseball, there were multiple factors at play. Major League Baseball was maturing as a business. They instituted a formal draft in 1965, which the Yankees had firmly objected to. Before, the Yankees would sign whoever they wanted, and players rarely turned the team down, giving the Yankees first pick at upcoming talent. In addition, the Yankees also had business relationships with other teams, in which, if a young player started doing well, the Yankees would force them to trade that player to their team, which created a farm team in the majors type vibe. And as time went on, franchises were less willing to continue that arrangement. As a result of losing their advantages, the Yankees continued to lack any kind of success in the evolving league. CBS's ownership proved to be disastrous for both parties. The chairman of the company then asked Yankees president E. Michael Burke to buy the tanking franchise off their hands, but Burke lacked the financial capacity to do so. George Steinbrenner, a shipbuilder from Cleveland, attempted to have an MLB expansion team placed in Buffalo in 1969, but failed. He also attempted to buy the Cleveland Indians in 1971, but also failed. He dreamt of owning a sports franchise and had spent the early 1960s trying to keep the new American Basketball League viable, but ultimately couldn't prevent it from folding in 1962. He lost significant money in the catastrophe, but paid off his creditors over the course of the decade. Burke approached Steinbrenner after meeting with the chairman of CBS. Steinbrenner immediately jumped to the opportunity and, together with Burke and 5 other investors, bought the Yankees out from under some of the worst years of their existence in 1973. Burke remained a minority shareholder, but by the end of the year, Steinbrenner bought out the rest of the investors. He took immense pride in his ownership and expected nothing less in the organization, instituting a personal appearance policy that included being clean-shaven with long hair slicked back or trimmed, which is still in effect today. He also began immediately with plans to dramatically renovate the now 50-year-old Yankee Stadium. CBS had wanted the place renovated, but the stadium wasn't under their ownership, and the nearby Mets refused to share their stadium even for only a brief time with the Yankees. The neighborhood around Yankee Stadium had also collapsed, and the entire area was becoming a larger problem. In mid-1972, New York City Mayor John Lindsay swooped in with the city buying the stadium and driving a 2-year renovation project in partnership with the Yankees' new owner. The city of New York had taken the stadium from Rice University through eminent domain, and given the dilapidated state it was in, with concrete chunks falling from the stands, few contested. Lindsay first suggested to the Yankees building a brand new stadium on the existing Bronx site, complete with a dome, but at the time, the city was on the brink of bankruptcy, and so the New York City Board of Estimate was only able to approve $24 million for renovations to the existing stadium. In 1971, the New York Giants football team announced that they would be building a brand new football-only stadium at the new Meadowlands Sports Complex in New Jersey. Their last game at Yankee Stadium on September 23, 1973, ended in a tie with the Philadelphia Eagles. The team would play the next 2 seasons at the Yale Bowl in Connecticut while their new stadium was constructed. While maintaining most of the original structure, the renovation was rather dramatic. The roof over the grandstands, complete with metal frieze, was removed and replaced with extended seating and shell-topped with modern stadium lights. A painted version of the frieze was recreated in a section along the outfield. The playing surface was lowered by 7 feet and pushed out to improve sightlines and the field's configuration. Meanwhile, modern escalators and ramps were installed to make the upper decks more accessible. Wooden seats were replaced with plastic ones. An entirely new middle section was constructed to enlarge the press box and add 16 luxury suites. The field's new dimensions placed the center field wall 417 feet out with a distance of 430 feet just left of center, and the short porch down the right field line, which originally sat only 295 feet from home plate, was also pushed back. Meanwhile, about 1/3 of bleacher seats were eliminated to add a blacked-out batter's eye in the middle of the ballpark, and all of the columns supporting the upper decks were removed. The net new capacity was slightly less than before, at about 57,500 fans. The renovation was so drastic that dedicated fans referred to the venue as Yankee Stadium 1 and Yankee Stadium 2 respectively. The grand opening of the rehabbed ballpark took place at the Yankees' home opener against the Minnesota Twins on April 15, 1976, with the Yankees winning 11-4. While the stadium became shiny and new again, it was a baseball diamond in the rough of the Bronx. Turmoil in the Yankees' front office in combination with rowdy fans and the rough shape of the borough led many to call it the Bronx Zoo in reference to the nearby tourist attraction with the same name. Yankee right fielder Reggie Jackson would hit 5 home runs in the 1977 World Series, which was the Yankees' first championship in 15 years after back-to-back World Series appearances, and would win the series again in 1978. The 1979 season would be a tragic one for the organization. On August 2, 1979, the team's catcher, Thurman Munson, died in a plane accident in which he was the pilot. The whole team flew to Canton, Ohio for his funeral, and then flew back for a game against the Baltimore Orioles. Emotions were difficult to contain during the nationally televised game. Close friend and teammate Bobby Mercer used Munson's bat during the game and scored all 5 runs in a 5-4 victory. Munson's locker sat empty except for his catching gear, and would do so for the rest of the stadium's life, with Munson's number 15 jersey being immediately retired. The 1980s saw one more World Series championship, but the franchise would embark down another long stretch of mediocrity. The team would be led by first baseman Don Mattingly, and George Steinbrenner deepened his reputation for his impulsive antics as he constantly was hiring and firing his front office. He hired his longest-running manager in 1995 with clueless Joe Torre, whose lackluster career yet calm demeanor proved a good contrast to the bombastic owner. The same year, the team elevated pitchers Andy Pettitte and Mariano Rivera. In 1996, the Yankees elevated shortstop Derek Jeter to their roster. This trio begun the next great era for the organization, leading them to another World Series championship that year. The rivalry between the Red Sox and Yankees also intensified during the decade, with chants of 1918 and Curse of the Bambino echoing throughout the Bronx in their matchups, with these fans garnering the moniker Bleacher Creatures. The 1998 Yankee team, featuring Jeter, Pettitte, and Rivera, is considered one of the greatest baseball teams of all, subjectively and by fact. They finished the season 114-48, which was an American League record, and they then swept the San Diego Padres in the World Series. Their astounding 125 wins in a single season remains the best in Major League history. The 1999 squad would have a comparatively great year and sweep the Atlanta Braves in the World Series, giving the 98 and 99 Yankees a combined 22-3 postseason record. The Yankees returned to the World Series once again in 2000, this time facing off in the first Subway Series in 4 decades, and first with the neighboring Mets. They would win in 5 games, losing in Game 3 after breaking their own record for consecutive World Series game wins, now at 14 games in a row. While sluggish after 3 consecutive titles, the franchise slipped a little in the following regular season, but the 2001 campaign, however, would be like nothing seen ever before in professional sports. On September 9, 2001, the Yankees secured a 7-2 victory against the division rival Red Sox. They had an 86-57 record at that point, which was enough to hold on to the second spot in the American League. 2 days later, New York City was the center of the world, and the events that took place shook every aspect of American society, and the last thing on people's minds was baseball. The Major League halted all play and debated canceling the rest of the season. However, after more than a week of hiatus, they decided to continue play. The Yankees wouldn't return to Yankee Stadium until September 25th, but with the city of New York on their back and the rest of the nation rooting for them, they returned for the 4th year in a row to the World Series. On October 30th, 2001, President George W. Bush refused to be secluded by fear in a bunker and suited up in a bulletproof vest to throw the ceremonial first pitch before Game 3 of the World Series. The Secret Service originally suggested Bush do the ceremonial pitch in Arizona as it was deemed much safer, but Bush wanted to make a statement that Americans didn't have to live in fear. Shortstop Derek Jeter found President Bush warming up in the bowels of Yankee Stadium before the game and advised him to throw his pitch from the pitcher's mound and said, "Don't bounce the ball or they'll boo you." And suddenly, pressure began to build up inside the president. Bush later recalled that he had never had as much of an adrenaline rush in his life. He walked onto the field and chants of USA began immediately. He stood at the mound only long enough to acknowledge the crowd, and then threw a perfect strike to Yankee catcher Todd Green. The crowd erupted in cheers and emotions ran wild. In just one swing of his arm, the president made life feel a little easier again. New York City and the whole nation went to work the next day a little more at ease and proud to be an American. The Yankees would go on to win Game 3, but ended up losing the series in the final moments of Game 7, with the Arizona Diamondbacks taking the title. In addition to Yankees baseball and Giants football, the venue hosted all kinds of events throughout its life. The MLB All-Star Game was held there on 4 separate occasions in 1939, 1960, 1977, and 2008. From the time it opened, it hosted boxing matches featuring the greats of their time, with the most recent championship fight being contested in 1976 between Victor Muhammad Ali and Ken Norton. College football also frequented the stadium. Notre Dame and Army moved their annual matchup there in 1925 and did so until 1947. In the 1928 game, tied at 0-0, Notre Dame coach Knute Rockne gave his "Win One for the Gipper" speech, and the Irish went on to win. George Gipp would later be documented in the film Knute Rockne All-American, starring future U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Concerts would later become another staple at the venue, with several notable performances during its time. Other events there included the New York International Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses and Billy Graham's 1957 crusade, which brought in 100,000 attendees and was the largest crowd the stadium had seen at that point. Several different popes would hold mass at the venue, and on June 21, 1990, a rally was held there for the release of Nelson Mandela from prison. Only a venue as old as the 80-year-old Yankee Stadium could be host to so many events and iconic moments in sports, but given how frequently sports venues turn over across America, one has to wonder, why exactly did the Yankees stay there all those years? Yankees president George Steinbrenner had been lobbying for a new stadium as early as the 1980s. New Jersey had been recruiting the team heavily to move to their Meadowlands sports complex, which housed the Giants Stadium and the Nets' Brendan Byrne Arena. New Jersey Governor Thomas Kean got the state legislature to pass a bill that authorized land for a new stadium at the complex, but couldn't get funding to back it up. In 1987, a funding proposal for a new stadium was put up for referendum, with taxpayers rejecting the $185 million price tag. Despite New Jersey being unable to get anything done, Steinbrenner still used relocation as a threat in negotiations with New York City. NYC cycled through mayors in the late 1980s and early 1990s, which inhibited closing the deal on various proposals, but both mayors Ed Koch and David Dinkins wanted to keep the team in the Bronx, offering to renovate Yankee Stadium again. But Steinbrenner refused all 13 proposals brought before him to keep the Yankees in the still decrepit borough. By late 2001, the Mets were also seeking to build a new stadium, and New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani negotiated with both teams to build separate stadiums, one in Queens for the Mets and one in the West Side Yard in Manhattan for the Yankees, estimating the total deal to be around $2 billion, with $1.2 billion coming from taxpayers. Michael Bloomberg, however, would become mayor in 2002, and he staunchly opposed the agreement, calling it corporate welfare and attacking how unreasonably favorable the lease terms were with each team, and took particular issue with the fact that the teams only needed to give the city 60 days notice to leave town if the city didn't agree to do whatever it was the teams wanted. Using escape clauses, Bloomberg exited NYC from both deals and over the next 2 years negotiated new ones. The new proposal placed the new Yankee Stadium directly next to the old one in the Bronx, and a few months later, the plan for the Met Stadium was announced as well, and both teams agreed to move forward. Architects acknowledged that fans only took issue with the old stadium's function and looked to stay true to its legacy. The new design kept the playing surface dimensions essentially equal. The exterior was modeled the same as in the old stadium and was constructed with 11,000 pieces of Indiana limestone. The metal frieze and roof over the upper deck were also reinstated. Really, the stadiums looked almost the same. To the fan and player, however, there were noticeable differences. The new stadium was actually 63% larger. It included much wider concourses and larger seats with cup holders, resulting in a smaller overall seating capacity. 56 luxury suites were also constructed in addition to 4,300 club seats, which were non-existent in the old stadium. Restaurants available year-round were also added. The team store was doubled in size, and the new Great Hall included 31,000 square feet of retail space. The video scoreboard nearly tripled in scale to its predecessor, and the playing surface, which remained grass, included a drainage system that could enable play in as little as an hour after 2 inches of rain. The Yankees' entire headquarters was relocated to the new stadium, and the state-of-the-art facilities were 2.5 times larger than in the old stadium. After the center field wall had been moved in during the 1970s renovation to Old Yankee Stadium, monuments to Lou Gehrig, Miller Huggins, and Babe Ruth had been enclosed, creating a Monuments Park. These, among new exhibits, were moved to the Yankee Museum in the new venue. Included is a replica of the Yankees' old locker room, which is where the empty locker of Thurman Munson was relocated. Groundbreaking for the new stadium took place on August 19, 2006, and work would continue for 32 months. During construction, a worker buried a jersey of Red Sox player David Ortiz underneath the visitors' dugout, hoping to place a curse on the Yankees similar to the curse of the Bambino on the Red Sox. The worker was later exposed by colleagues and the jersey was recovered, with the Yankees organization donating the jersey to a Red Sox-sponsored charity. The worker also claimed to have buried a 2004 American League Championship Series program, but doesn't disclose where he placed it. Regardless, the Yankees would win the World Series in their inaugural year in the new stadium. In the 2000s, new Yankee players became stars, such as Alex Rodriguez. Another player, pitcher Corey Lytle, became the second active Yankee to die in a plane crash, doing so in the offseason of 2006. Years of anticipation had built for the original Yankee Stadium's final year, and in its honor, the MLB hosted the 2008 All-Star Game there, which was the longest All-Star Game to date at nearly 5 hours. The Yankees themselves weren't having a good season and missed the playoffs for the first time in 14 years, meaning that the final game in the 85-year-old Yankee Stadium would coincide with the final game of the 2008 regular season, which, despite its age, made it feel like it was closing just a little too soon. The stadium's 8-decade run concluded with a Yankee win over the Baltimore Orioles on September 21, 2008, in a 7-3 score. Jose Molina hit the ballpark's last home run in the 4th inning, finally answering Babe Ruth's age-old query, and Mariano Rivera pitched a perfect final inning. Derek Jeter, the final Yankee at-bat in the old stadium, addressed fans after the game, telling them to, quote, "Take the memories of this field, add them to the new memories that will come at the new Yankee Stadium, and continue to pass them on from generation to generation." The team circled the stadium on the warning track, waving to fans and wishing the stadium goodbye, before walking off the field for the last time. The New York Yankees opened play at the new stadium, which bared the same name, at the beginning of the 2009 season. Public tours lasted for another 2 months of the old Yankee Stadium. Later in November, monuments and memorabilia began being removed and taken to the new building. Front office staff vacated the premises in January the following year, and demolition of the playing field took place in March. By November 2009, workers began removing bleachers and lower portions of seating. Gate 2 was the only portion of the stadium that had remained unaltered throughout the various renovations. There was an attempt to save it, but it was unsuccessful. By March 2010, Only the outer walls of the iconic structure remained. And on May 13, 2010, the stadium was considered completely demolished, and just like that, all 85 years of history were gone. In its existence, 37 of 83 World Series were played there, with the Yankees winning all but one of their 27 titles at the stadium, playing a total of 6,581 games. This history earning the stadium the nickname the Cathedral of Baseball. After it was demolished, 10 acres of the site not used for its successor were converted into Heritage Field. When opening, it had blue markers woven into the grass that showed the outline of the original baseball diamond, with second base in the new park being in approximately the location of home plate on the original field. Only 2 years later, during the All-Star break of the 2010 season, the longtime Yankee Stadium public address announcer Bob Shepard, who had announced Yankee home games from 1951 to 2009, passed away, with the longest Yankee owner in the organization's history, George Steinbrenner, passing away only 2 days later, both of whose livelihoods and legacy will forever be tied to the old Yankee Stadium. I really can't imagine what it must have been like to watch Babe Ruth at the original Yankee Stadium, or Derek Jeter and the Core Four in the late 90s. Those great memories and legends of sports history make the deletion of old Yankee Stadium all the more painful. It is admirable that the new venue is very similar to its iconic counterpart, but to have stood there and watched one of the most well-known and culturally symbolic places in America just fall over must have been absolutely heartbreaking. The venue stood through incredible moments in American history and played host to Yankee greats that even non-baseball fans know the names of. There's no saying how long the new stadium will last, but if the past is any indicator, the Boston Red Sox have a lot more losses to look forward to. And on that note, thank you for watching. Subscribe to LaBriche TV for more Modern Ruins content. And be sure to comment what modern ruin you'd like us to cover next.